The iron gates of the Thorn estate did not just close, they locked with a finality that sounded like a bone breaking. I stood in the freezing mud of the carriage path, clutching my 6-month-old son, Bram, to my chest while my own father, Eustace Thorn, spat at the hem of my dress. "You are no longer a Thorn," he declared, his voice carrying across the village square so all could hear my shame. "You brought a nameless brat into a house of honor. Go to the workhouse, or go to the devil, but you shall not spend another night under my roof." I looked at him, my heart shattering into 1,000 jagged pieces. I had committed no crime other than believing the lies of a man who promised me the world before vanishing. My father didn't just want me gone, he wanted me destroyed. He signaled the hounds, and their barking filled the air as they began to snap at my heels. I had to run into the dark, freezing woods just to keep my child from being bitten. I was a daughter of a gentleman, but in a single second, I had been turned into a hunted animal. The cold was a physical weight that pressed against my lungs as I stumbled through the thickets. I looked back at the house, hoping to see a glimmer of mercy, but my mother was closing the heavy velvet curtains. She chose her comfort over her own child. I was entirely alone in the world with no money, no food, and no coat for Bram. Every door in the village remained shut as I passed. I saw the lanterns being extinguished one by one, a silent signal that I was a plague they did not want to catch. I realized that by morning, we would likely be found frozen under a tree. The injustice of it burned hotter than the frost. I had been a dutiful daughter, but my father had used my one mistake to erase my entire existence. I reached the edge of the Blackwood Moor and collapsed, my strength finally failing. I wrapped my arms around Bram, praying that my body heat would be enough to keep him alive for just a few more hours. I closed my eyes, waiting for the end to come in the darkness of the woods. Just as the shadows began to swallow my mind, a lantern flickered in the distance. A man approached, his boots crunching rhythmically on the frozen ground. He didn't rush at me with the aggression of a hunter, nor did he look at me with the pity that feels like an insult. He stopped exactly 6 feet away, his shadow tall and imposing against the snow. He didn't reach for me or my child. "It is a bitter night to be without a fire," he said, his voice a deep, steady rumble that seemed to vibrate in the cold air. "My name is Silas Vane. I have a hearth and a roof. May I have your permission to help you?" I looked up at him, stunned. Nobody had asked for my permission for anything in months. Men had taken, they had demanded, and they had judged, but this man stood there waiting for my word. Despite my terror, I saw a strange kindness in his eyes. I nodded weakly, and only then did he step forward to lift us from the mud. He carried us toward a house that looked like a fortress. Silas took me to his manor, a place of stone and shadows called Vane's Rest. It was isolated, perched on a hill far from the wagging tongues of the village. He provided 2 separate rooms, one for me and a small nursery for Bram. Most men who took in a fallen woman expected a price to be paid, but Silas never even entered my room without knocking. He would leave trays of hot food outside my door and disappear before I could even thank him. One evening, he asked if he might sit by the fire while I fed the baby. He didn't demand it, he asked. I watched him through the corner of my eye. He was a man of few words, but his presence was like a shield. I found a small gold locket tucked into the swaddling clothes I had brought from home. I opened it and saw a crest I didn't recognize. It was not the Thorn crest. It was something royal, featuring a dragon and a crown. I realized then that Bram's father had lied about everything, including his name and his rank. A few days later, the peace was shattered by a loud pounding on the front door. I hid behind the banister as Silas opened it. It was my father, Eustace Thorn. He didn't come to apologize. He came because he had found a merchant willing to pay a high price for a pretty servant, and he wanted to sell me to cover his gambling debts. "Give her to me, Vane," my father barked, stepping into the hallway. "She is my property, and that brat belongs in the parish bin." Silas stood in the doorway like an iron wall. He did not raise his voice, but the air around him seemed to turn to ice. "She is a guest in my home," Silas said, his hand resting on the hilt of a heavy cane. "And your rights as a father ended the moment you set the hounds on her. You will leave now, or I shall be forced to show you how I treat trespassers." My father retreated, shouting threats about the law, but Silas simply closed the door and turned to me. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. I began to feel safe, but I also felt curious. Silas was a man of great wealth, yet he lived alone and was shunned by the local nobility. One afternoon, as he was chopping wood, his sleeve slipped up. I saw a jagged, ugly scar circling his wrist. It looked like the mark of a heavy iron shackle. I froze, wondering if I had traded one monster for another. Was he a criminal? Was that why he was so isolated? That night, as we sat in the library, I couldn't help but stare at the mark. He noticed my gaze and did not hide it. "It is the mark of a prisoner," he said plainly. 10 years ago, I was jailed for protecting a woman from a nobleman who thought he could take what wasn't his. I lost my reputation and my youth, but I saved her life. He looked at me with a steady gaze. "I do not regret it, Isolde. Some things are worth the price of a name." I felt a wave of relief so strong it made my eyes water. Disaster struck in the middle of a Tuesday night. Bram woke up with a terrifying, barking cough. His skin was burning to the touch, and he was struggling to breathe. I ran to Silas's room, frantic with fear. He didn't hesitate. He saddled his horse and rode through a blinding sleet storm to fetch the local doctor. When they returned, the doctor stood in the hallway and refused to enter the nursery. "I will not waste my time on a nameless bastard," the doctor sneered, looking at me with total contempt. "It's a waste of medicine." Silas didn't argue. He walked to the wall, took down a flintlock pistol, and pointed it directly at the doctor's chest. "You will treat the child," Silas said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "And you will do it with the same care you would give a prince, or you will not leave this house alive." The doctor turned pale and immediately went to work. By dawn, Bram's fever had broken. Silas had risked a return to prison just to save my son's life. As Bram recovered, Silas sat by the window, watching the snow melt. He looked at me and spoke with a seriousness that made me sit up straight. "The village will never stop attacking you as long as the boy has no name," he said. "They see him as a target, and they see you as a victim. I would like to offer him my name through a legal adoption." I felt my heart skip a beat, thinking this was the moment he would demand a marriage of convenience. But he continued, "I do not ask to be your husband, Isolde. I do not ask for your hand or your affection. I only ask to be his shield. If he is a vain, the law will protect him. You would remain a guest, free to leave whenever you wish." I was speechless. He was offering the protection of a father without any of the control. I realized that this man was the only person who had ever truly respected me. I nodded, tears streaming down my face. "Thank you, Silas," I whispered. The legal papers were signed, but our safety was a lie. A few days later, a mysterious black carriage with gold-trimmed wheels arrived in the village. It didn't stop at the inn or the church. It moved through the streets like a predator. People started whispering about a man in a velvet cloak who was asking questions about a woman with a silver-haired child. I knew that hair. It was exactly like Bram's. I felt a cold dread settle in my stomach. The man who had ruined me wasn't just a wandering rake. He was someone with enough power to find a needle in a haystack. I watched the carriage from the high window of Vane's Rest. Silas saw my fear and placed a hand on the windowsill near mine, but he didn't touch me. "I see them," he said. "They are looking for something they discarded. They will find that this house is not easily entered." I realized that the battle for Bram was only just beginning. The next morning, a large wicker basket was left on the doorstep. Inside were rolls of the finest silk, silver rattles, and expensive mechanical toys. There was no note, but at the bottom was a small gold coin with a dragon stamped on it. It was a gift that felt like a threat. It was the father's way of saying he could reach us whenever he wanted. I wanted to throw the toys into the fire, but Silas stopped me. "Don't destroy them," he said. "We will need them as evidence. He is trying to buy his way back into a life he abandoned." I realized that the father wasn't coming for me. He wanted the heir. Bram was the only son of a powerful man who probably needed a successor. I felt sick at the thought of my baby being taken away to be raised by a man who had left us to die in the mud. Silas stayed awake all night, patrolling the grounds with a lantern and a rifle. I spent the afternoon in Silas's vast library, searching through books of heraldry. I needed to know who the dragon belonged to. Finally, I found it in a dusty volume about the great houses of the north. The crest belonged to the Duke of Pendragon. My heart stopped. The man who had called himself John and promised to marry me was actually Lord Julian Pendragon, the youngest son of the Duke. He was royalty in all but name. I had been a toy for a prince. The locket I held wasn't just a keepsake, it was proof of a royal bloodline. I showed the book to Silas. He looked at the crest and his jaw tightened. "The Pendragons are known for two things," Silas said. "Their immense wealth and their total lack of a soul. They don't want a son, they want a chess piece." I realized then that my father had likely known who Julian was all along. He hadn't just kicked me out, he had been waiting for the price to go up. The tension was becoming unbearable, and Silas could see I was fraying at the edges. That evening, as a light wind whistled through the eaves, he did something unexpected. He put a record on the old gramophone and the sound of a soft waltz filled the kitchen. He stood in the center of the room and bowed slightly. "Isolde," he said. "The world outside is cruel, but in here, we are just people. May I have your permission to lead you in a dance?" There was no audience, no grand ballroom, and no pressure. I took his hand, and for the first time in a year, I felt like a woman instead of a problem to be solved. We moved slowly across the stone floor. He held me with such reverence, as if I were made of glass. For a few minutes, I forgot about the Duke, the carriage, and my father. I felt the steady beat of Silas's heart against my hand. It was the first time I realized that I wasn't just staying for the protection. I was staying for him. But the world would not let us be. While we were at the market the next day, my father, Eustace Thorne, broke into Vane's Rest. He didn't take silver or gold. He went straight for my room and stole the locket. He knew exactly what it was. By the time we returned, he was already gone. Silas found the muddy footprints and the broken drawer. "He's gone to the Duke," Silas said, his voice grim. "He's going to use that locket to blackmail the Pendragons. He'll sell Bram to the highest bidder." I felt a wave of nausea. My own father was selling my child like a piece of livestock. The injustice of it was so deep I couldn't even scream. I had thought we were safe, but my father's greed was a poison that could seep through any wall. Silas immediately began packing a bag. "We have to move," he said. "The Duke's men will be here by sunset, and they won't be bringing gifts this time." He was right. 3 hours later, the manor was surrounded by men in red livery. These weren't thugs. They were the Duke's private guard. A tall man with a cold, aristocratic face stepped forward. It was Lord Julian, the man who had lied to me. He looked at me with a bored expression, as if I were an old debt he was finally paying off. "The locket has been returned to its rightful owners, Isolde," Julian said. "My father is willing to be generous. We will take the boy to Pendragon Castle to be raised as a lord. You will receive £5,000 to move to the Americas and never speak of this again." He spoke as if he were doing me a favor. He didn't even look at Bram, who was crying in my arms. "You left us to die," I said, my voice shaking with rage. "You don't get to take him now." Julian laughed. "I am a Pendragon. I take whatever I wish. You are nothing." Julian moved to grab Bram, but Silas stepped between them. He didn't draw a weapon this time. He simply stood there, his presence more intimidating than any blade. "The boy is legally a Vane," Silas said, pulling the adoption papers from his coat. "Under the law of this land, he is my son. If you touch him, you are kidnapping a child of a gentleman." Julian sneered. "A gentleman? You are a common convict, Silas. Your name is worth nothing." Silas didn't flinch. "My name is on these papers, and the law is the law. If you want this child, you will have to take him over my dead body and through a public court where your father's name will be dragged through the mud." Julian hesitated. The Duke hated scandal above all else. He signaled his men to wait. "This isn't over," Julian hissed at me. "You can't hide behind a ghost forever." They retreated, but I knew they were just going to find a more legal way to destroy us. In the middle of the night, a woman named Elspeth arrived at the back door. She was shivering and covered in a common traveler's cloak. Silas let her in immediately, and I saw a look of pain on his face I hadn't seen before. "This is my sister," he said. Elspeth looked at me with eyes full of pity. While Silas was out tending to the horses, she pulled me aside. "You need to know the truth about why Silas lives like this," she whispered. "He didn't just go to prison for a woman. He went to prison because of your father, Eustace Thorne." I felt the world tilt on its axis. Elspeth explained that 10 years ago, Silas was the rightful heir to a portion of the Thorne estate through his mother. Eustace had forged a will to steal it all. When Silas tried to fight him, Eustace framed him for a crime and sent him to jail. Silas wasn't just protecting me, he was protecting the daughter of the man who had stolen his life. The revelation was like a physical blow. Silas was my distant cousin, and my father had destroyed his life long before he destroyed mine. I felt a deep, burning shame for the blood in my veins. Elspeth handed me a small, leather-bound book. "This is Silas's journal from prison," she said. "Read it. You'll see that he never stopped fighting for what was right." I realized that Silas's isolation wasn't because he was a criminal, it was because he was a victim of my family's greed. He had every reason to hate me, yet he had given me everything. I went to the stable where Silas was working. I didn't say a word. I just walked up and hugged him. He stiffened at first, then slowly rested his chin on my head. "I know about the will, Silas," I whispered. He sighed, a sound of profound exhaustion. "It doesn't matter, Isolde. The past is dead. Only you and Bram matter now." 18. We received an invitation that was actually a command. The Duke of Pendragon was holding a royal gala, and the Queen's cousin would be in attendance. The Duke wanted to settle the Bram matter quietly by forcing us to sign away the child in front of witnesses, making it look like a voluntary agreement. If we didn't go, he threatened to have Silas arrested for theft of family secrets. Silas looked at me. "We have to go," he said. "We have to face them in the light where they can't hide." He bought me a dress of midnight blue, the color of a winter sky. He didn't ask me to look beautiful, he asked me to look strong. As we walked into the grand ballroom of Pendragon Castle, the whispers started. I was the fallen woman, and Silas was the convict. But we walked with our heads held high, refusing to look down at the people who judged us. 19. Lord Julian approached us in front of a circle of high-ranking lords and ladies. He wore a smug smile, thinking he had won. "Isolde, my dear," he said loudly, trying to play the part of a misunderstood lover. "I am so glad you've come to your senses. Let us sign the papers and put this unfortunate business behind us. You'll be well compensated for your time." He reached out to pat my hand, but I pulled away as if his skin were poisonous. I looked around at the crowd, my voice clear and loud enough to reach the back of the room. "You didn't leave because of business, Julian. You left us to freeze in the mud because you were too much of a coward to stand up to your father. You are not a lord. You are a shadow of a man." The room went deathly silent. Julian's face turned a violent shade of red. I had committed the ultimate sin. I had told the truth in a room full of lies. 20. Julian was humiliated. In a fit of rage, he pulled off his white glove and slapped it across Silas's face. It was a formal challenge to a duel. The guests gasped. Julian was known as one of the best swordsmen in the country, while Silas was older and had spent years in a cold cell. "Tomorrow at dawn," Julian hissed. "Let's see how your protection holds up when your heart is on my blade." I tried to stop it, but Silas stepped forward, his eyes burning with a cold, sharp fire. "I accept," Silas said. The next morning, on the misty cliffs behind the castle, the two men faced each other. Julian fought with a flashy, aggressive style, but Silas was like a mountain, immovable and patient. With one swift, expert move, Silas disarmed Julian, sending his sword flying into the sea. Silas held his own blade to Julian's throat. "I could kill you," Silas whispered. "But that would be too easy. I want you to live with the knowledge that a convict spared your life." 21. While the men were on the cliffs, I wasn't sitting idle. Elspeth and I had gone to the Thorn Manor while my father was away at the gala. We searched the old family Bible that had belonged to my grandfather. Inside the hollowed-out cover, we found it, the original, unforged will. It clearly stated that half of the Thorn lands and all the mining rights belonged to Silas Vane. My father had kept it hidden for a decade, using it as a footstool. I clutched the paper to my chest. This wasn't just about land, it was the key to Silas's freedom and my father's downfall. I realized that my father's power was built on a foundation of paper and lies. I sent a message to the High Solicitor, the only man in the county who couldn't be bought by the Duke. We had the proof, and we were going to use it to burn the Thorn name to the ground. 22. We thought we had won, but Eustace Thorn was a desperate man. He found out we had the will and realized his life was over. In a final, cruel act, he didn't run. He locked my mother, his own wife, in the damp, rat-infested cellar of the manor and set the stables on fire. He sent a note to me, the will for a life. Choose quickly. I looked at Silas, my heart torn. My mother had abandoned me, yes, but she was still my mother. Silas didn't hesitate. "We save her," he said, "because we are not like him." We rode back to the burning estate. The heat was immense, and the smoke was thick and black. Silas used his heavy cane to smash the cellar door open. He carried my mother out just as the roof began to groan. She was coughing and weeping, finally realizing that the husband she had defended was a monster and the daughter she had cast out was her only hope. 23. The The fire destroyed the stables, but it didn't destroy the truth. With the villagers watching, Silas and I stood in front of the burning manor. I held up the original will for everyone to see. Eustace Thorne is a thief and a murderer, I shouted. The villagers, who had spent years being bullied by my father, finally found their courage. They helped us capture Eustace as he tried to flee into the woods. We recovered the legal box he had stolen, which contained the Pendragon locket and other stolen documents. My mother, sitting on the grass, finally spoke up. She confessed to the solicitor that she had watched Eustace forge the will 10 years ago. The injustice was finally being corrected in the light of the fire. But as the police led my father away, a carriage arrived with the Duke's crest. The Duke of Pendragon wasn't going to let his son's humiliation go unpunished. 24. The Duke didn't use a sword. He used the law. He had Silas arrested on the spot for high treason, claiming that Silas had stolen state secrets from Pendragon Castle during the gala. It was a complete lie. But the Duke's word was law in this county. Silas was shackled and thrown into a carriage. "Take care of Bram," he whispered to me through the bars. I watched him disappear into the night, my heart feeling like it was being ripped out of my chest. The Duke looked at me with a cold, triumphant smile. "You have the land now, Isolde. But you have no protector. By the time I'm done, Silas Vane will be swinging from a rope." I realized that I couldn't stay in the village and fight a duke. I had to go to the only person more powerful than him. I had to go to London. 25. I traveled for 2 days on a rough mail coach, clutching Bram and the bundle of documents. I arrived in London, a city of smoke and noise that felt like a different world. I used the last of my money to buy a decent cloak and made my way to the gates of Buckingham Palace. The guards laughed at me at first. "The Queen doesn't see beggars," they said. But I pulled out the locket with the royal dragon. "This belongs to the Pendragons," I said. "And it carries a secret that will rock the throne. Tell the High Chamberlain that Isolde Thorne is here with the truth." I waited for 6 hours in the rain. Finally, a man in a black suit approached and led me inside. I wasn't a daughter of a gentleman anymore, I was a mother fighting for the man who had saved her. I was ushered into a small, private room where the Queen's cousin sat today. 26. I didn't beg, and I didn't cry. I laid out the documents on the table. The forged will of the Thorne estate, the proof of Silas's illegal imprisonment, and the locket that proved Lord Julian's abandonment of his child. "Silas Vane is a man of honor who was destroyed by the greed of my father and the pride of a duke," I told the Chamberlain. "If the Crown allows this injustice to stand, then no one in this country is safe." The Chamberlain looked at the documents for a long time. He knew that the Pendragons had been growing too powerful and too arrogant. The Queen's cousin entered the room and looked at Bram, who reached out and grabbed her finger. She smiled. "A child should not pay for the sins of his father," she said. 2 hours later, a royal decree was signed. Silas Vane was granted a full pardon, and Bram was legally recognized as the heir to the Thorne mining rights, bypassing the Pendragon name entirely. 27. I returned to the county with the royal seal in my hand. Silas was released from the local jail, looking thin and tired but still standing tall. I met him at the gates, and for the first time, I didn't wait for him to ask. I ran into his arms. He held me so tight I could barely breathe. We returned to Vane's Rest, which was now legally part of the unified Thorne Vane estate. But Silas began to pack his things. "You are the mistress of the manor now, Isolde," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You have your name back. You have your wealth. You don't need a convict to protect you anymore. I will move to the cottage on the edge of the woods." I looked at him, realizing he still thought he was a burden to my reputation. He still didn't understand that he was the only thing I ever truly wanted. 28. I stopped him at the front gate, the same place where we had first met in the snow. "You asked for my permission to help me, Silas," I said, stepping into his path. "You asked for my permission to dance. You asked for my permission to be Bram's shield. But you never asked me what I wanted." He looked at me, confused. "What do you want, Isolde?" I took his hands in mine. "I want you to stay. Not as a protector. Not as a cousin. I want you to stay as my husband, because I have loved you since the moment you stood 6 feet away in the snow and treated me like a human being." He stared at me, his eyes filling with tears. He slowly dropped his bags. "May I have your permission to love you for the rest of my life?" he whispered. I laughed through my tears. "You've had it all along." 29. The end for our enemies was quiet but firm. Eustace Thorne was sentenced to life in prison for forgery and arson. He spent his final days screaming at the walls of a cold cell, forgotten by everyone. Lord Julian Pendragon was sent to a remote colony by his father to avoid further scandal. He died in a gambling debt duel 3 years later, leaving no heirs. The Duke of Pendragon was forced to pay a massive fine to the Thorne estate for the illegal use of the mining designs. He lost his seat in the House of Lords and lived the rest of his life in a decaying castle, watching the Thornevane flag fly higher than his own. My mother lived in a quiet cottage on our grounds. She never fully recovered her spirit, but she spent her days teaching Bram how to read, trying to make up for the years of silence. 30. Our wedding was held in the small village church. It wasn't a grand social event for the nobility. It was a celebration for the people. Every villager who had helped us during the fire was invited. I wore the midnight blue dress, and Silas wore a suit of fine charcoal wool. When we walked out of the church, the bells rang so loud they could be heard all the way to the Blackwood Moor. Bram was a toddler now, running through the grass with a laugh that sounded like music. We turned the old Thorne Manor into the Vane Sanctuary, a home for women who had no protection and children who had no names. We made sure that in our county, no woman would ever have to stand alone in the mud again. Silas and I stood on the porch of our home, watching the sun set over the hills. I wasn't the fallen woman anymore. I was a woman who had been found, respected, and finally, truly loved.